Hi, I'm Nathan from Serious Geeks, and in this video I'm going to talk about how to counter the Nightbringer in Warhammer 40,000. Much of the community online is talking about the Nightbringer and saying how it's going to be a model that is going to be auto-included in any competitive army list with Necrons going forward. Whilst it certainly is very strong, there are some very effective countermeasures you can take to try and defeat this model and therefore win games that may be tournament based or highly competitive. So, when considering how to defeat your potential opponents, it's always good to evaluate what they're capable of. The Nightbringer is incredibly potent at defeating invulnerable saves and models that are extremely tough to kill in other circumstances. The Nightbringer is dangerous in both close combat and at range. Close combat because of its stat line and weaponry. The Scythe of the Nightbringer has two options: the Reaping Sweep, which enables it to have 12 attacks and -3 AP, strength 7, or Entropic Blow, which will be ×2 strength, which goes up to 14, -4, d6 damage, and ignores invulnerable saves. That's right, 6 attacks that ignore invulnerable saves. Characters and small elite units will struggle against this model. Through his access to the Catan powers, the Nightbringer also can generate a lot of mortal wounds. We can see very easily how dangerous the Nightbringer is, and your opponent is taking him along for that very reason. He does cost 350 points, and he has a movement value of 8, so it's kind of safe to assume that the opponent is going to launch him at you as quickly as possible. So we know where he's coming straight for you, probably your most expensive units, so you can kind of lay a trap for him if you have the options available. We know the Nightbringer is coming forward, it's going to close the gap, so make it overextend, make it come far too far forward so it cannot get the benefit of other units protecting it. This means you can focus on it with a well-timed counter charge as well as doing some damage with shooting. That's not to say that the Nightbringer is going to usually be completely on its own. Its movement of 8 ties in quite nicely with Scorpec destroyers, and Scarabs can also keep pace as well. Scarabs in particular are likely to be used as shields for the Nightbringer, potentially getting in the way of smites that may be otherwise targeting him. Therefore, it's paramount that you strip the screening units away from the Nightbringer. Once his screening units are eliminated, we can use various methods to try and take out the Nightbringer once and for all. The first, probably most obvious method, is going to be shooting. You can only score 3 wounds a turn if you're going to rely solely on shooting. For the most part, this is only going to really be Tau who are affected this way. A lot of other armies, if not all of them, should have access to psychic powers or assault units that can do a little bit of damage and finish off the Nightbringer where needed. So if you are going to rely on shooting to eliminate the Nightbringer, make sure you cause the full 3 wounds per turn that you're able to do against him. He has living metal, so he will heal 1 per turn in his own command phase. So if you miss a turn of doing any damage to him, you're going to make it that much harder to eliminate him later on. In the meantime, you're going to have to spread your units out. You're going to have to move your units in such a manner that he can't multi-charge multiple units to kill a couple of units or tag them in close combat. Otherwise, you're not going to have enough units left at the end of the game to be able to survive, to be able to finish off the Nightbringer. You don't have to completely spread across the table, though it will help, but what you do have to do is ensure that no more than 1 unit at a time can be killed by the Nightbringer. This might be Fire Warriors, it might be a Devilfish, it might be other units that are kind of in the way. Just make sure that he can only kill 1 unit a turn, as if you remember, he costs 350 points, which means he has to kill quite a lot of units to be worthwhile, and that means that you can actually kind of slow him down from a points attrition basis. If I'm honest though, killing the Nightbringer with just shooting is a recipe for disaster. I think that you're leaving yourself open for the Necron player to counter you. He's going to be able to use other units that may be able to get in close and do a lot of damage, and you might have to spread around the board in a way that you don't want to. I mean, it might be your only option if that's the army you've taken, and if it is, good luck to you, but make sure that you do spread around the board, score as many primary points as you can, and do those 3 wounds each turn just to make sure you can kind of finish off the Nightbringer in the last few turns of the game. The next tried and tested method of defeating a model is in close combat. A little bit risky when you consider that the Nightbringer is so powerful in that area, but it isn't completely out of the realms of possibility. It's here that elite units and elite armies will really struggle, because feeding them to the Nightbringer just to get a few extra wounds is likely to be exactly what the Necron player wants you to do. This doesn't mean you should completely shy away from launching your Blade Guard at the Nightbringer if you're trying to actually slow him down and cause some wounds. Bear in mind that you might have caused other wounds in the shooting phase and other methods, but for the most part this is going to be players using Orcs, Genestealer Cults, Tyranids, people with access to plenty of cheap models that they don't mind throwing away into close combat, or they know that can actually do a few extra wounds before they go down, such as Genestealers that aren't particularly cheap but very dangerous. It's also important to point out that the Nightbringer can only suffer 3 wounds in any one phase of the game, but this doesn't mean that if he charges into close combat and then you have a subsequent assault phase in your following turn before the Nightbringer has a chance to be used again, that he can't suffer a further 3 wounds in your assault phase for a total of 6. This is exactly what I meant when I said that the Nightbringer can be overextended and left on his own when not supported by the rest of his army. Remember, the Nightbringer only has 9 wounds to start with, so if it takes him a turn to march up the table, suffer 3 wounds, he charges into close combat with a rather dangerous unit of yours and then suffers another 3 wounds, then you inflict a further 3 wounds in your own turn against him, then he's going to be in a lot of trouble. It's certainly easier to do damage to the Nightbringer in close combat than it is to rely on taking him down purely by shooting. But again, I would recommend using a combination of factors to bring him down, using different phases of the game. For this, we're going to move on to the psychic phase. Rather fittingly, the Nightbringer is incredibly vulnerable to psychic powers. He has no natural defense himself, and mortal wounds will sting him quite badly. Admittedly, he can only suffer 3 at maximum in any one turn, but that is on top of and separate to any other damage he suffers in other phases. This is why stripping away those screening units is quite important. If you can cast a couple of smites on him and get those wounds up to a maximum of 3 for that phase, then you've done a lot of damage to him that he's going to have to suffer in the shooting phase again. That's a total of 6 wounds. It's actually quite possible and feasible that this model can be wiped out within 2 turns of the game. It's not just Thousand Suns and Grey Knights that have a distinct advantage against the Nightbringer. Anyone with access to Psykers can do a lot of damage to him. They can basically make him so that he can't be overextended, which means the Necron player has to think twice before he gets stuck in with him, and his model costs 350 points, so it is a really big investment to not get the most out of. Psychic powers that don't have to target the closest model are also very useful in this aspect, and Eldari, Thousand Suns, Grey Knights, and even certain Space Marine psychic powers, as well as some other factions, can be very useful in this regard. It means that you can definitely get those wounds in without having to worry about clearing out the chaff that may be protecting him. There are plenty of other psychic powers that he has no defense against. Things like psychic shackles that will slow him down to half movement, 4 inches a turn, means that he's going to be almost completely neutered. It means that he might be unable to do anything in a single turn, which is going to be fairly terminal. If you can slow him down and stop him from doing something at 350 points, there's only 5 turns in a game, he's going to be wasteful. Overall, the psychic phase is going to be a very useful tool for stopping the Nightbringer from dominating the tables in the competitive scene. It's for this reason I recommend that anyone who's taking part in a tournament make sure they take at least 1 Psyker, because it gives you some options to be able to compete against a Catan, particularly the Nightbringer. Lastly, we're going to move on to the miscellaneous versions of killing the Nightbringer. It's not generally going to kill him, but there are plenty of ways that you can cause damage to a model outside the shooting phase, assault phase, or psychic phase. As an example, using Codex Space Marines, because it's the most recent book, Incursor squads have access to haywire mines. Once per battle, when an enemy unit finishes a charge move and gets within engagement range of the bearer's unit, the Incursor squad in this case, on a 2+, that unit will suffer D3 mortal wounds. You bait the Nightbringer into charging the Incursor squad by putting them into a situation where he has to get rid of them. Make sure that you've stripped all the units away from the Nightbringer in the area, so the Nightbringer's only choice is to charge the Incursors or do nothing that turn. Either way, this is a big win. You're stopping the opponent getting the most out of a unit, or the Nightbringers suffering additional damage outside of your turn. Remember, each player turn is made up of 7 different phases, and although you won't be able to cause wounds in each of them, it's certainly worth studying your codex book and your army rules to see if you can cause damage outside the usual shooting, psychic and fight phases. To summarise, I would say the best way to defeat the Nightbringer is to use multiple phases in the game to do as much damage to him as possible and take the initiative away from the Necron player. If you're only relying on the shooting or charge phases, you're handing the initiative to him, and your opponent will definitely be able to utilise that to minimise what damage you can cause, or use his other units to cause as much damage to you in other ways as possible. Remember, even Tau have access to close combat units in the form of Kroot. Sure, they're not brilliant, but they can do a bit of damage to the Nightbringer outside of the usual shooting phase, and thus enable you to kill him 1 turn earlier than perhaps you might have had a chance to do. For other armies, I actually don't believe the Nightbringer is going to be as dangerous as people make out. I mean, if used correctly, he's going to kill a lot of models, but there are various methods of neutralising him fairly easily using psychic powers or other special rules, and you can do so in multiple phases of the game, which means the opponent who took the Nightbringer has invested 350 points into something he's not getting any use out of, which gives you a points advantage. So I think in a competitive sense, I think the Nightbringer might be a flash in the pan. I don't think we'll see him as often as what people make out. You certainly have to build a list to protect him, otherwise he will go down and he will leave a gaping hole in your army. Well, on that note, please let me know what you think below. I'm hoping that this is a helpful guide to many people on taking out the Nightbringer. Even Tau players who have the biggest disadvantage against him, I just hope you all get something from it, and I'd like to hear in your comments below what you think. Please like and subscribe, help me grow the channel, and I'll catch you all soon. Peace out.